I have 4 minutes until I have to say an acknowledgement. Good evening, everybody. Once again, if you didn't see that beautiful little short video that just played, we would like to acknowledge that Venus Fest is located on the traditional Indigenous territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. During virtual Venus Fest, many of our artists and participants will be located on different unceded territories beyond this. So please take some time to learn about the history of the land on which you live, as well as the communities that have cared about this land, and how you might participate in restoring justice. So my name is Erin. I've been a music journalist and, a various amount of titles for the past 10 years, as well as a founding board member of Advance, Canada's Black Music Business Collective, and I'll be the moderator for this panel today. But of course, this isn't really about me. It's about these lovely panelists that we have today. And I will say at this point in my career, it's very rare that I get to sit on a panel where I don't necessarily know everybody in real life, which is, a humble blessing. And I'm super excited to get to know everybody that's here today. So with that being said, I'd love to get everyone to kind of introduce themselves and, just tell us a little more about you.
I'll start. My name is Maura, Johnston. I'm a freelance journalist. Currently, I live in Boston, Massachusetts. I've been a journalist for about 25 years now. I started in college, and I have most recently been writing for the Boston Globe and Entertainment Weekly, and I also write for a lot of other places. I get a lot of tax forms at the end of the year, and I also teach at Boston College. I teach a class on music journalism and a class on online journalism, and I'm really excited to be here and hear about everybody's thoughts and experiences. So thanks for having me.
Hi, everybody. My name is René. Greetings from El Paso, Texas, which is just reading about the Tigua Native peoples who, this is the unceded territory of the Tigua Native peoples. I'm very happy to be joining you all for this panel. I am a writer and musician. I perform music under the moniker Ziemba, and right now I work as a full-time reporter for El Paso Matters, a border publication, but I've also written pretty extensively about the music industry and worked as an advocate for music industry change. I started a list called the Future Music Industry, which is a compendium of music industry organizations with women and non-binary people in positions of leadership. And I'm excited to talk about all these pressing issues. Just a little pet proviso too, if you hear squeaking or banging, there's a puppy in the room. I can't do anything about it, but I'm gonna be on it with the mute button.
Fantastic. Hi, greetings. I am Saffron St. James. I am coming at you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, currently known as Ottawa, Ontario. I am a multidisciplinary artist, mostly working in music and in movement, but I also do a lot of work with zines. I curate, edit, and write zines. And more recently, I've been sort of taking the idea of storytelling and doing that more digitally through social media with a number of local festivals, including House of Paint, which is our local hip hop festival, and DIY Spring, which is a local grassroots underground music festival.
Anin Bojo, everyone. Jashko Beneze Kwe Desnikas and Megazi Dodem Bachuanan Donjaba Ojibwe Anishinaabe Kwe. My name is ShoShona Kish, and I'm joining you from this really beautiful Anishinaabe-Wendat land traditionally. It's Three Fires Society, Medewan Society land, and I'm at home, which is so lovely. Not minding the home time. I'm an artist, a storyteller, primarily a musician. Like my day job is being a musician, and I moonlight as an organizer. I founded an organization called the International Indigenous Music Summit, and we are hosting conversations around around equity and social justice, but just also about the beauty of stories how we can work together, how we can stand together, how we can amplify and learn from each other in an international context as Indigenous people and allies. I also founded an organization called The Stronghold, which is about intersections around art and advocacy and activism, and how we can just use our platforms to stand up for the things that are most important to us.
I love this. We have an incredible group of women here. Crazy. I will say that I am such a strong believer that, you know, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you come from. You know, so I think one of the questions that I'd love to ask, and this, I would love it to be an open forum, when you first got into this industry, you know, how did you envision your goals at the time? What were they? And, you know, for myself, I can say I was super naive to what was up against me and what was ahead of me. So I would love to know if you guys were facing the same things at that time. And when specifically did you come into this industry?
I'll go first. I arrived in the music industry a little later in life. I had just finished grad school. I was in my late 20s when I started to play shows out. And, you know, I think people who work and exist outside of the music industry but care about music don't often think about the like problems of inequality that pervade the industry. And I definitely did not. But before starting to play shows and really operate within, like, see the inner workings of the industry, I never deeply considered how pervasive sexism was, how pervasive racism was, and really every corner of the industry. So it was pretty eye-opening for me as an independent artist, booking tours, trying to get press, and finding that, you know, most places that I turned, all of the gatekeepers were affluent white straight men. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call. And then I think the next step was after observing that, oh wow, like there's some really clear problems here, it was like, oh, maybe I could be a part of changing it for the better. And I think that's part of how I went from being a musician to also being someone who's very active and commenting and mobilizing on changing the music industry and envisioning what a better music industry could look like.
That's so true. All of that is true. Anybody else? Oh, I also think ShoShona is having a few difficulties with her screen for anybody who's streaming. But we can hear her, I believe.
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know how to unfreeze my screen, but I will keep playing with that. But I 100% echo René's experience in that, you know, when I first started making music, the music industry was a really interesting and challenging place. And I don't know how far we've come from there, but I do know that my experiences have, you know, evolved and changed over the years. And I just remember starting out, and I would be programmed on these stages with my band Digging Roots, and we would be like on the very far stage that was like where the francophones and the POs, like people of color and Indigenous people, would all be on this far stage. And you know, I think you know, we're beginning to see something that looks like change. I don't know if we're actually landing somewhere different or if we're just having a moment. And I really hope that some of the things we're seeing right now are different. But I also know as a woman, you know, I work with my husband in the band. We both fronted, and I can't tell you the number of business meetings I had where people addressed my husband directly and acted like I wasn't in the room. And really, in our case, I mean, he's the studio audiophile tech guy, like wonderful musician, and I'm the business person. So it was strange for me to be kind of like jumping. You guys can't see me right now because I'm frozen, but I would be like jumping up in the background going, hey, like over here, you know, I'm the one who's, you know, working on this businessy stuff and doing that, the industry development side, and really feeling strange dynamics around trying to have respectful conversations around, just all of the work related to our band, but also the industry building that I've always been really invested in. I think I have to leave for a quick second, and I'm getting advice from tech, so I'll be right back, I promise.
No worries. We'll see you in a second. Saffron, I think you were going to say something. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, now that I'm unmuted, I guess I'm actually seeing so many parallels between sort of my experiences, first becoming part of the entertainment industry, and like what what I'm hearing echoed with everyone else's sort of experiences so far. Even though sort of like where I sort of got in was a little bit different, in that I am a classically trained bassoonist. And so my very, very first experiences in the industry were as a classical musician, which is a lot. It's a lot. And my goals at the time, because it was something that I'd been doing since I was like a young teenager, were very much like, oh, I am going to do this thing. I'm going to go through the classical music machine, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to be in an orchestra, and that will be my life. And realizing at every turn how grinding and sort of unpleasant a lot of those experiences can be, from the concept of being like a piece in that machine, and that sort of, and recognizing that so many of the kind of upheld status quo things were very much being upheld by an industry that is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly affluent, overwhelmingly very much an old guard of just the most status quo of status quo things. And that's kind of intensity is definitely what like pushed a shift into into working as a solo artist, and wanting to create work where I saw myself reflected, even though there have been composers of color, there have been like all the way back to, like, if you think of Baroque music, there have been women and composers of color and people doing things, but of course their stories aren't told. And wanting to create work that I saw myself in was really where I ended up going with that.
It's interesting because I feel like when I first broke into music journalism, as a freelancer back in the days of alt weeklies, there was definitely, in my view, a lot of like adherence to narrative, a lot of adherence to the narrative that, the rock bands were the greatest, and, the big rock critics, Robert Christgau, Greil Marcus, no offense to them at all, obviously, but, that they were like the sort of prophets coming down with the tablets to tell everyone what was good. And I really wanted to foresee a music journalism that was sort of different than that brought in more perspectives about what could be good and what could succeed. And, one thing that I've learned, like, cause I thought that, people, I guess I wanted like everybody to kind of like evolve with the world. But I think like one of the things is just like the economics of the status quo, from like the people who are making the biggest decisions are, usually beneficiaries of the various status quos that are held up in 21st century society. And also just like, people like narratives, people like, and I think that breaking free of that has been really, really tricky for music journalism, especially now where the playing field is so much vaster, and so much like, there are so many more possibilities for people to listen to. So it's almost like information overload will make you go back to your own stories. But I think that it's our, like my responsibility and my colleagues' responsibility as music journalists to like try and push through popular ideas of narrative, which are often outdated and rooted in like archaic norms, and really see what's actually happening. And it's hard to do because, like, you know, especially as like a freelancer, because you have to go through like levels and levels and levels of you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. But it's really rewarding to do too.
It's interesting too, because I feel like that kind of dominant narrative that has always been so pervasive in like popular music and rock music, it's like this weird oxymoron where it's trying to present itself as being transgressive while in actuality upholding very traditional values of like patriarchy and capitalism and heteronormativity, you know, all those things. And I do see like that kind of narrative is getting problematized more and more in like discourse in mainstream media, but it's still the dominant story, you know.
And it doesn't help that, you know, like media outlets are also just like so, you know, like hanging on, like even if they're doing well, there's a perception of hanging on by a thread. So it's like, well, we have to do what the market wants, and the market is a very conservative force, which can be really, really, gosh, I sound like such a downer. I'm so sorry. But yeah, like it can be a really conservative force. And so, you know, and especially with the highlights, you know, the way that just like you can see like what people are and aren't reading and stuff with journalists, but also with like, you know, I would imagine that it's similar for musicians too, being able to just have so much information about what's being heard and seen. And, you know, I'm sure that there's like a counter in the corner of the YouTube screen that we're on right now. So yeah, I don't know. Anybody?
Well, I think that this discussion of narratives is really important. I think, you know, in the Indigenous community, we're talking about narrative sovereignty, you know, and the sovereignty of our stories and our songs. And this is, you know, central, I think, to all of us. I think all of our stories end up being the thing that tells us who we've been, who we are right now, and who we will become, like the dream of who we might become. And so when all of the stories are sort of forced through this colonial, mainstream, heteronormative, you know, primarily white, male dominant space, then the stories that we're hearing and that are amplified become this very narrow bandwidth of potential and also of perspective. And I think this is why I feel so passionate about our stories and this idea of narrative sovereignty for all of us, you know, and this for us is like Anishinaabe coming from like an oral tradition. Our stories held all of the brain trust and the creative trust and the spirit trust of our communities. And so they held all of the knowledge of our governance. They held all of the knowledge of our value systems. They had all of the knowledge of, you know, just like the social fabric of what bound us and all of that intergenerational knowledge and wisdom. And you know, and then this becomes this transgenerational thing that everyone adds to, and it builds and carries on. And right now, I think what's happened in mainstream culture and Western culture is that the stories have become this very small place. And in some ways, we're all like story warriors, you know, where we're fighting for the opportunity to tell this like vast, beautiful, diverse, important, profound possibility of who we can be together.
That's exactly it. And then we're talking about these narratives, and, you know, everybody has mentioned there's sexism, there's racism, there's, you know, homophobia that's controlling all of our narratives within the music industry. You know, I had a question of what are some of the other kind of isms or, you know, challenges that you have faced since the start of your career? Because again, this is about change, and I want people to realize that there are so many things that need to be changed, and that this isn't a moment in time. It's something that needs to be consistently worked on. So when we're talking about the isms, what else have you guys faced when trying to, you know, share your narrative, share your stories, and like stay true to your authenticity at that?
To touch a little bit on ShoShona's sort of idea of that like filter that everything sort of gets passed through, a big challenge from what I've found personally has been that filter being described as palatability or something being marketable, when it's less about actual marketability and about what an audience might actually want, and more about, again, upholding and maintaining status quo. And that idea of like, this thing has to make us a bunch of money, and the only way it'll make us a bunch of money is if it works in the way that has always made us a bunch of money, being a big barrier to creating change. Like the idea that so many decision makers are not necessarily interested in change because there hasn't been change before, so we're not going to change anything.
Right. In their head, it's if it isn't broken, why fix it, right?
Yep. Except for where it's broken.
The other thing about music is that like people tend to like music that speaks to their own experience. Like it makes sense that when like a white rich dude is running a record label, he's like, I love this song. It's just like my, like, and then lo and behold, like their artists on this label that this dude runs are like 95% bands comprised of 4 white guys. I mean, I've thought a lot about like, are there aesthetics to the music that it is propped up based on these like kind of systems of oppression? And I do think there are, because things are so oriented around what resonates for affluent, cis, hetero white men, So that's part of it. And that this like palatability question that Saffron was bringing up, it's like, well, yeah, maybe like this like trans Indigenous artist isn't going to speak to your personal experience, but that doesn't mean that it's not like really important and beyond palatable, like crucial for other people to hear and experience, So
I think that's such a good point, and I think this is why it's so critically important for women to be telling stories. I mean, we can look at this from a whole bunch of different perspectives, but who's curating? Who are the gatekeepers? Because, I would really love to see the Black community be able to curate the art that we're hearing out of the Black community, rather than, like a white rich dude who's 60 something, or I want to hear women curate our own stories. I want to hear Indigenous people curate our own stories. And I think from that, we can, like these other aesthetics begin to emerge, these other value systems. And I also think that right now we're all a little bit still, on some level, relating sort of what we make and what needs to be heard through their lens, because of this palatability, marketability question. And, and I think that this continues to be this dominating conversation that we really need to shed ourselves of, because it's archaic. And, I do want to hear stories that reflect my own experience, but René and Saffron and Erin and Maura, all of you have stories, human stories that reflect my experience. I am not limited simply through a lens of my indigeneity. It's just this gorgeous place that I have a privilege of operating from in the world that, informs all of these things for me. But it's not a limiting factor in the sense that I don't have empathy and common ground with all of you. Of course we do, and we have more in common than we have separating us in terms of human experience. this is a fallacy to me, not to contradict you in any way, René. Like, I think that that's true. We do want to hear our experiences reflected back, but we don't want that exclusively.
Yeah, I'm not, and I'm not interpreting your response as contradicting me, but I also am not saying that we should only seek out things that reflect our own experience, but that has been, I think, a tendency among gatekeepers is to uplift the voices that reflect their experience in some way. And I think it's a natural human tendency, but it's actually like an important task of diversity and inclusion to prioritize bringing in other voices and to challenge that like tendency to only gravitate towards things that reinforce your like little bubble worldview and understanding of reality. Like that's how compassion happens, is by being exposed to, different people who see the world differently.
Right, because I guess the idea of experiencing the experiences of others, and you're creating your own experiences that are now shaping sort of how you move through the world. Like it's so important. Just
for sure, to be a well-rounded person in this industry, you absolutely need to understand and appreciate other people's stories. And I think that's a big part of this industry that's lacking, is what everybody is saying. It's, you tend to stick to what you know and elevate what you know, as opposed to starting to learn about other people and what they're offering and what they're putting out into the universe. Maura, can I ask you, given that you have been, a journalist and writing about these stories for so long, what have been the changes that you've seen? You said earlier about how you wanted to kind of change the narrative with regards to how music journalism is approached. So what have you seen change since you started?
So I definitely think there have been a lot of positive changes as far as representation goes. I mean, definitely the internet has allowed for a greater variety of voices to be heard and to have their work, have their work as journalists, and then have the musicians that they spotlight be read on a possibly grander scale than they might have been even 10 or 15 years ago. It's funny because like when I was looking at the questions, I was thinking about how 8.5 years ago now, I wrote like a piece when I was at the Village Voice about like writing about female musicians and like, what not to do. Like, and it was basically like, don't treat being a dude as the default. And I think that that is, it goes, and again, like it goes back to the whole idea that René was talking about, that ShoShona was talking about like what stories get told, what stories get amplified by like the gatekeepers. And it's difficult because I feel like there are with the sort of decline in outlets, that have like a wide reach, there's definitely like points of view that I think are still overlooked and narratives that are still like perpetuated. But then again, like, there have been pieces where like people have been willing to sort of like take on these long-standing structures of oppression and really interrogate them. And, I mean, I was thinking about how like Pitchfork yesterday, I believe, ran a piece on like Black musicians in indie rock, and it was a good piece, but like it was also like met with really great responses from musicians who were like, well, I hope that this piece is the first step in you covering more artists of color that are playing rock that and not just again, like it's it goes back to kind of the whole idea, like there's this journalist Rich Juzwiak, I think he still works at Jezebel, and he used to have like a running tally of like all the times Page Six would call R&B singers rappers because like they were just sloppy. And like I feel like that kind of like assumption of what a musician is about because of the way that they look, it definitely does still happen, and I feel like we still have a long way to go on that. Like, I think that you can see it in discussions with musicians where they talk about like how they don't like being pigeonholed as certain things because of whatever they might be doing, whether it's their their race or their gender or their sexuality. And it's like, and again, that's what I was talking about earlier with narratives. So I think that there have definitely strides in like better representation in like editorial, although it's tough because there's also like the journalism recession of the 21st century that means that high profile outlets that pay well, which, you know, that's important, especially like since I'm, you know, getting older and like I'd like to, you know, have some sort of like comfort in my single life and everything, that are also giving people these opportunities and not just like closing ranks. So
for sure.
I guess my answer is it's a mixed bag.
No, for sure. I totally get it. As a fellow music journalist, I totally get it. I will take this minute to say that Salt's Untitled Black Is album is easily one of my favorites this year.
Yeah.
Incredible album. But I do want to talk about these words, diversity and inclusion. You know, they're words that we have probably consistently heard for the past 2 years and not seen much action attached to them more times than not. So what do these two words mean to you guys? And then after that, we do have a audience question. I will say, if you guys are streaming it, please put your questions in. We'll definitely get them answered. But what does inclusion and diversity mean to you?
We're all just being super polite to one another. I think that, I mean, you know, I've sort of interrogated this word inclusivity because I am invited in and included in these conversations often that are centered somewhere, and I am other. And so I'm being included in this as in my otherness. And I think I have been just thinking about that a lot. And there's a truth to that, right? Because we all acknowledge that there are systemic truths to that we're all living with each day. But I wonder if this is something that we want to center the work around, that sort of is founded somehow in our otherness. And I'm really interested in understanding and knowing, like, narratives language is so important, you know, and it really is like the DNA of our culture, and the way that we use it is really important and informs our thinking about it and the possibility sometimes of our thinking around it. But yeah, I've been I feel like the language and the foundation of where we're working from right now is still a little bit of a minefield. And I don't have all the answers, but I do know that it's, I'm very interested in continuing to learn about how we can center this work in a way that is useful, you know, helpful, progressive, and like full of that potential that I think is required.
Yeah, just to kind of respond to some of what ShoShona was saying, I also think the like nepotistic urge and how much nepotism like fuels like so many facets of the music industry. I like, not to sound like a cynic, but I just don't think that's going away. Like, people are always going to be like doing favors for their friends and stuff. And then you have problems because people like, their little insular bubbles, and, you know, like scene versus clique. I mean, it's tricky, and something that because I've grappled with these questions a lot. Something that I've kind of landed on is just that part of what has to happen is that the norm has to become every person who's engaging in the music industry taking on a personal responsibility and like to uphold high ethical standards for making sure that you are not just trying to prioritize diversity and just being conscientious of which voices you're amplifying. Like, I remember the first time I went to South by Southwest, and I was walking down this street where there were like, you know, show after show after show after show, and every single show was all white guys, every single one. And I do think that booking diversity is changing for the better. I have seen improvement in the time that I've been working in the music industry. I have seen increasing calls for music festivals to make explicit pledges of booking diversity, which to varying levels of efficacy. Like I've seen some where there's been backlash, or like there was a music festival where they didn't tell the artists that they were only booking women, and then the people were like, I'm leaving this festival, like, because then there was like, this is a women's festival, they didn't tell the people in the festival. So I mean, it's a bumpy road, but I do see more and more people making efforts, and like that band, the 1975, they like made a pledge to like not play festivals that didn't have like 50% women artists. I mean, I think you're seeing increasing calls for people to prioritize booking diversity. And obviously booking is just one facet of a very complex picture. But to me, the key thing is making it so that the norm is for people to hold themselves personally responsible for cultivating an inclusive like music community around them, and to work actively as an ongoing process of promoting, like including marginalized voices, opening access to people who might not otherwise have access. But it's not, I mean, there's a lot of gray area in that answer, you know, and it's like, I also, yeah, I don't think nepotism is going anywhere. So.
If I could add to that, like I do think that, you know, this idea of diversity and inclusion, we're really in the early stages of understanding what that might mean, and I don't believe that we engage these exercises or thought processes or heart processes of diversity and inclusion in programming or in discussion or in ideas on behalf of equity-seeking communities. We do that on behalf of the larger community because we know that the more beautiful, powerful voices at the table, the better we will all be, the stronger the solutions will be, the broader the perspectives will be, and that when we are building these homogenistic systems, everyone suffers. And so I really encourage all of us, I mean, I know we all want to do the right thing. I believe that we do, from whatever frame of reference we're operating from, but the work of diversity and inclusivity is not do good work. You know, social equity is not about doing good and making ourselves feel good. And I'm not suggesting anyone here was saying that, but this is really for the point of discussion as this reverberates in the universe, is really about, you know, we do this as an exercise on behalf of the larger community. And for those of you out there who are part of that mainstream, you do it on behalf of yourself. Not on my behalf.
I'm about to bring what you just said into every D&I meeting that I am asked to be a part of. Because you're right, this isn't something that we do just for ourselves. We're doing it for our community. We're doing it for the future of our communities. You know, and the nepotism point, that's incredible to bring up, because I think that's a large part of why we have been so standstill. I do want to go to this audience question that says, it's a little fragmented, but do you feel you have more alternative distribution channels for your music these days? And I think this will actually tie into René's list, but as artists, do you guys feel like you have more alternative distribution channels for your music?
What's René's list?
Oh, she will tell us about that, unless you want to tell us about that first, and then we can get into this question.
Well, the list I made is a list of music industry organizations that have women and non-binary people in leadership positions. But yeah, in terms of distribution channels, I mean, yes. I don't know, Bandcamp's great. I think it's a lot easier as an independent artist if you don't have a team to get your music out into the world. Like, there's a lot of grassroots and low-cost ways to distribute your work. At the same time, trying to find like a broader audience, and I think it depends on how you're defining distribution and like what level of reach you're talking about, because then the barriers are much greater.
Makes sense. I hope that answers that question. Moving back into kind of taking up spaces, Saffron, as you know, somebody who is a storyteller. I mean, everybody's a storyteller on this panel, but you know, you've worked in a specific way of highlighting marginalized people within, you know, your own world. But why do you think those stories have been looked over for so long? You're on mute. You'll get there.
One of these days. I feel like we have actually touched on a lot of it over the course of this discussion, just sort of naturally. But a lot of it can be boiled down to inertia and comfort versus discomfort in terms of like those who have habitually and historically held positions of power or being gatekeepers in the avenues through which stories were channeled, not being super into anybody else's experiences. And I think that a lot of that, the change that's been catalyzing through that has come at the behest of of technology and the decentralization of information and the ease with which it is now possible to put work, to share stories, to put things out into the world, as well as a slow but steady shift in the people who are holding those positions of power now, the people who are telling the stories. We are seeing more of an ability for folks whose voices have historically not gone heard because there were only a few channels through which to hear those voices. Now being able to grasp the microphone or the photocopier or the Instagram story or the live feed in their own hands and do the thing.
Do the thing. Love it. I do love that. René, I actually had a question for you, given that you're in El Paso, Texas, and that there is a massive immigrant population there. Do you see that those stories are reflected in the music industry? I personally wouldn't. I don't necessarily have that knowledge, so I'm just curious.
Do I see that immigrant stories are reflected in the music industry?
Yeah, specifically from like your area, given what, you know, everything is happening.
I don't know that I can speak to the music scene here that well. I moved back here in February, right before COVID hit. So
okay, no worries.
I mean, I definitely know plenty of bands here where they have members who live in Juarez and members who live in El Paso, but that's different than I mean, a lot of immigrants who are coming to the United States are not in a financial position to be making music because the industry, you know, it's so financially risky to do that you have to have a certain level of safety net. I mean, or you don't have to, but it's just so much more difficult if you don't. And so I that's not to say that immigrants are not making music. They certainly are, but I think it's less often that you hear that story because of, you know, the financial realities of participating in the music industry has created an environment where you're much more likely to encounter the work of someone who has a financial safety net, just because it's a risky thing to pursue. You know, the likelihood of
Sure.
return on your investment is lower than
Sure.
in some industries.
Absolutely. ShoShona, having, like, given that I've worked in this industry for a while, especially the Canadian music industry, and when it comes to Indigenous music, from whatever part of the country it is, it's still something that is often looked, not highlighted enough, not talked about enough, kind of put aside. Have you seen any changes in the past few years with regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are still largely invisible, and our voices are still largely silenced. And I mean, I think that there have been some really interesting and wonderful touchstone moments of like, oh, maybe something else could emerge from here. It's really, in my opinion, much too early to say, because I think we could look back and say those were tokenistic moments, and I don't in any way mean to minimize the work of the artists who have been heard, because there's some gorgeous and brilliant work coming out. And there are some really important artists that I hope will continue to be heard on national and international stages. But I'm aware of this like wealth of talent that exists, and there is really, there's still really a system that will choose one or two artists and put them on a stage. And so, everybody is still, there are only a select few who get heard. When there's this just like profound surge of creativity that's happening. And I feel grief when I think of those stories not being told and being heard. And I know that I have some perspective from an international international context of Indigenous voices around the world, and our experiences on Turtle Island and in like Canada are very similar to what our brothers and sisters are challenged with in the US or in Australia or in, Sami territory in Northern Europe, brothers and sisters in South America and South Africa. Like the story is over and over and over again. And we continue to be like in the most furthest margins of society and economic activity. And I don't have any confidence that the work that's done until this point is enough to cause significant change. I think what we're doing is we're beginning a path that could lead to that. And I'm excited about that. Like, I want to be a part of that. And we are not in a place where we can rest on having arrived somewhere.
For sure. It's almost as if we're starting to build a house, and we're digging out the ground right now for that house to lay on. Saffron, did you have something to say?
Sort of further to that point, I think it would sort of be remiss of me to sort of talked about the decentralization of information without touching on that huge stumbling block in both both the music industry and everywhere of tokenism and trendiness. And it's such a tremendous concern where everybody gets very excited about a change and moving forward and propelling forward until it's not part of the news cycle anymore. And I think that that's something that we all need to kind of be very cognizant of moving forward to ensure that we are like creating that foundation in a way that is strong and lasting.
Yeah, that's real. I think a lot of people feel like, how we see tokenism is a sign of change. That Black queer artist won XYZ prize, and like, that's our change. It's not. It's, a great artist won a prize. That's just it. The infrastructure is the same. Nothing moves from there. So that tokenism is, it sucks. It's like you see these great talents and you want them to win, and in the same breath, you kind of feel like they are chosen for a certain reason to adhere to somebody's agenda. it's a very, very frustrating feeling, but I'm hoping that that can just kind of dissipate, you know, moving forward.
Well, but part of that is also just when the entire focus of how to change the industry is focused on artists and not looking at people with decision-making power and people controlling how the money is flowing. I mean, like, because that's the thing. And it's like, how do you get them out? You know, like, that's the question. Because yeah, we can uplift, you know, more diverse artists, but like if it's still behind the scenes, the people profiting, I mean, which like artists are not making the bulk of the money in the music industry either, like then you're not really changing the hierarchy that's embedded in this industry. So
for sure, that's literally why we kind of came together to create Advance, because at the end of the day, we need to change the entire infrastructure from, you know, hiring processes to even how interns are selected, because, you know, you can look at internships for labels, and a lot of the times it comes from a secondary education perspective. Those students are chosen from those places and not everybody has access, right? So ultimately, you know, it's a matter of hitting people with a very difficult, you know, questions and asking them in these D&I meetings, like, what are you gonna do? We can only teach so much about diversity and inclusion when it comes to, you know, everything that we deal with on a daily basis, especially as women when it's even more amplified. But it's an interesting thing to kind of experience. I know it's an emotional labor that I'm sure everybody is very tired of doing, but it's kind of necessary labor to see these changes through. So I do want to move towards the kind of future that we have in this industry. And, you know, given the state of the world right now, given that we're going through a pandemic, it's safe to say that, like, the industry may not be the same moving forward. You know, there's so many things that we've lost and so many things that may not come back. And honestly, whether it's led by like things like Blackout Tuesday, whether it's the pressure of initiatives like the show must be paused, which if you don't know what that is, I really do urge you to kind of look it up, or just the pressure that people have started to place on corporations and industry labels. You know, in your ideal world, do you think any of this would have ever happened had, you know, this wake-up call not happened at all?
Do you mean the pandemic as the wake-up call?
The pandemic, the pressure that's been applied by like Blackout Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, the sort of the sort of like confluence of events that happened, particularly this spring, I think was very. I mean, I think it broke a lot of things open because I feel like, I mean, especially in the States where just so much has been just like so, you know, incredibly broken. And I do feel like the opportunities that have arisen might not have arisen had the pandemic sort of not, you know, made everything kind of like halt and like everybody just sort of like sit and have to think with their, with you know, their thoughts and, you know, realize that the status quo hasn't been working for anybody who isn't at the top, really. So as far as the future, I mean, I don't know, because, you know, one thing, and I know, I don't think we've touched on this much, but, you know, live music was such a huge part of the economy. And like, I was having arguments, you know, 12 years ago with tech bros who would be like, if you can't do it live, there's no point in being a musician. And I'm like, that is totally everythingist in so many ways. And now, you know, because of really unfortunate circumstances, like the opposite of that is the flip side of that scenario has happened. So, you know, the future, I mean, I think that the way that people are being really more emboldened to speak up for their rights and for the rights of others is really a wonderful thing. And I hope it continues. I found that I really did, like, if you go back today and look at the conversations around the Pitchfork piece that I talked about earlier, like, I thought that they were really, really, illuminating about like the realities of being, a rock musician who was of color in 2020. And, it was very eye-opening to me. And it also introduced me to a lot of good bands. So that was a nice, and an artist too. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that the way that things were sort of were sort of put on pause, like has made people reflect, and will make them reflect more about better futures that are possible.
Anybody else? All right, that's cool. So we had an audience question that actually ties into my next question for everybody. But I would love for you guys to give me 2 wants that you would see change within the music industry, and then 2 needs that you need to happen for you to be comfortable in this field. Because I think we kind of convolute our wants and needs, and these are 2 very distinct things.
I feel like a want. Actually, no. You know what? No, they're both needs. But when I think of it, and these 2 things do tie very much together, is the need for a better supports for emerging artists, particularly emerging artists experiencing marginalization, folks who maybe did not have access to a lot of the things that mainstream artists who make it mainstream did. So supports that are happening at that level, be it like things like funding or access to education or things like that, but also having those things not being controlled by oppressors would be one major need. Like the communities that these supports are being given to actually being controlling not controlling, but being able to allocate those supports. And I guess I guess this is more of a want, but for less conflation of emerging with young, because it throws a lot of artists who often, due to the marginalization they faced, are coming into their careers later in their lives. And so when you're 28 or 35 or 53 and looking at grants for emerging artists, and then all of them are for people who are 20 years of age or under, it becomes this sort of weird assumption that you should be here by now, which is itself very much weird classist hierarchical perspective. It's not the best time for anyone. So yeah, I guess those would be my needs and wants.
Just to kind of comment on the support element that Saffron was talking about. So I partnered with the Creative Independent. We did a survey where we heard from 300 people who work in the music industry, both artists and behind the scenes music industry workers. And we asked them what they wanted to see in a better future music industry, and greater resources and support structures for artists was a major theme. And something that so many people brought up was mentorship for emerging artists, which is so lacking. And I also just wanted to bring it up, especially for this panel, because Venus Fest is doing really cool mentorship things that I found. I was oh my God, I applied for. But the thing is that's actually very rare. And I think, especially in times of COVID, but even before COVID, working in the music industry as an independent musician can be so alienating and frustrating. And you don't realize how common a lot of those feelings are, and how common a lot of the stumbling blocks are, that if there were some sort of platform that could enable artists to form like mentor-mentee relationships with each other, it'd be so useful. And the other thing that I would love, this is, I need it. I do need an artist coalition, but I also just really, really want it. Because I see them happening, you know, like No Music for Ice and the music work, the union. There are different coalitions forming to advocate for change in the industry, and I do think that's an effective form of like calling for change or calling out specific abuses or issues. Or even like the Burger Records thing is like kind of a coalition sort of thing that like ad hoc emerged, but like. My hope is for a really powerful coalition of artists to coalesce in the coming years. Oh my God, there's so many C's in that sentence. To be able to more effectively advocate for change, because it's like Spotify doesn't give a shit that they're not paying artists. Like, we need to put pressure on them. It's like if I'm saying my needs, I'm like, yeah, I need to like actually make income from my music and for it to be valued fairly. But like, how do you get that? So I feel like one of the steps to getting that is for artists to band together. But
I hope this happens for y'all. I'm not an artist, but I know it's a need that everybody needs. And I would also extend the mentorship portion to like business professionals in general, so that we actually understand the back end of where, you know, the money is kind of being made and such like that. I know recently I was asked who have been my mentors in the music industry, specific to Black mentors, and I had one person to name in Canada, and she's our highest powered exec in Canada. Her name's Vivian Barclay, and that's it. That's who we got. We got Viv, but I'll let you guys keep going. Needs and
well, I think I touched on this in terms of the curation, but I guess it's really broader. It's about like what you and Erin and Saffron were talking about in terms of interns. But I don't know any Indigenous A&R people at labels at all. There are, do we know of, in Canada, do we know of any Black A&R people at major labels right today?
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. And so I guess we're in a pretty dismal place around who's gatekeeping this music that everyone gets to hear, that's shaping our collective experience as a society and telling us, what we're doing and where we're going. And I don't want to diminish the voices that are out there in any way. There's room for all of us. And this idea of sharing power, it's not a relinquishing. To share power is not relinquishing power. And so I guess my need is for us to really look at what it means to be an ally, to seek equity and justice in our societies, and to be an ethical, good person, because we all have to do some digging deep. So I guess what I need is courage. I need courage, and I need action, and I really need our allies to do the real hard work of looking at what it means to share power and create space for change, because it doesn't exist right now. Not really. We're still fighting for every tiny inch. And we were talking, I was in a discussion yesterday, and we were talking about the truth and reconciliation recommendations here in Canada in response to the residential school system. And there was also a murdered and missing Indigenous women. I can't remember what the word is for when you when they officially gather and develop research and what am I looking for here? Commission. The commission.
I was gonna say council commission. Yeah.
The commission that looked at that really devastating issue here in Canada and came out with a series of recommendations around justice. I don't know why we need commissions to tell us about what is just. I'm really glad these happened, because apparently we do need them. Apparently, we need recommendations to say Indigenous people's voices are silenced on their own land. But I actually think that if we all were willing to do the work and dig deeper and be courageous, that we wouldn't need it coming top down. It would be coming bottom up. And that means every single person stepping up and knowing their own power, because we are all very powerful. And when we move together, you can't stop that shit. But we have to find each other, and we have to be courageous, and we have to do the work.
Love that. Love that. Also, again, sharing power is not relinquishing power. I think that needs to be a big billboard somewhere, because there's a big misunderstanding as to what that is, and I might put it on a t-shirt. I'll credit you. Needs and wants.
I mean, I think courage is a really great one, because I think that it encompasses so much. It encompasses not only the ability that you summon to bring change about from your own, but it's also like the courage to like view the future as like a grand optimistic place, instead of like some place that's been foreclosed upon by, you know, the wants of capitalism or the market or whatnot. And I feel like, you know, we all obviously, like, we all need to make a living, but I think that has become more of a burden when it comes to like not looking at, you know, again, like not looking at vistas beyond the ones that gatekeepers already possess. One thing that I was really struck by in René's creative independent piece was about community, and I feel like one thing that can happen with like existing in online spaces is just this kind of like narrow casting. And so I think it's important to like, because she talked about the importance of local community, and I think that that's very important, especially like I live in Boston, which is very like it's a very transient place. A lot of like university students will come for a couple of years, maybe stay a year or two after graduation, then leave. And so it's expensive too. So the music community is always turning over. And I think that having, you know, like the lens of like the online space and also the in-person space, that's something that I really want. I feel like those two coexisting makes for really beautiful things, because online kind of like broadens your horizons beyond what, you know, I mean, I wouldn't be talking to you right now probably if we weren't doing this online. And I've learned so much from everybody on this panel this evening. But it's also important to have like that sense of community, because like that's where you live. That's where you're like building your personhood and yourself. And so I guess like one of my wants, you know, when all of the pandemic stuff is over, is for those two ideals to mesh more assertively in a way that like brings out, like, you know, I learned so much from my students. Like one of my students one year did his final on like how the transit system in Boston has like prevented a lot of like hip hop artists in Boston from having like an easy transport to shows and stuff. And I thought like those are the sorts of things that I think you could really tease out and bring up and like grow your community with. I thought your piece was great, René. I thought it was really really a good resource.
Thanks so much.
I wish we could like share it somewhere, but there's nowhere to share it, like in this you know, environment. But if you can send the link over to our little chat, we can get it somewhere.
I can.
Perfect.
I'll find it.
We have a sneaky audience question. Our sneaky audience question is from Venus Fest, and they want to know how they can improve. And I will say, given that this is virtual and then you've gotten all of us here, and you have multiple days of, you know, content that's running, you're doing a great job. But I will also pass this along to everybody else and let them know what they can do better, or any organization for that matter. The silence means you guys are doing great.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It seems pretty well run.
Yeah, it really does, and very, very welcoming. And I mean, definitely, it's been. I'm really glad that I've been able to get involved this year after covering it in the past. So
Perfect. And shout outs to Sasha, who does incredible, work with you guys, who is also a friend of mine. So there's that. I'm very biased. I guess this is our last question, and it goes right back to the panel title. Is change happening? Just a yes or no will work, or you can expand on it.
My short answer is yes, but not enough. We need the fire burning under our asses way, way at a higher level. I see little glimpses of change here and there, but I want to see, tidal wave or sea change, not just a wave, not just one wave, not just the viral moment when we all decide we care about an issue for 48 hours or so and then we forget, but a sustained effort to reimagine a fair, more just and inclusive music scene or music industry, not just scene.
I absolutely agree with that. I hope it's not just a moment.
Yeah, I think that change is always happening, really, passively or assertively, and I think that our job is to be the catalysts for the kind of change that the 7 generations in the future will feel. The work ahead of us is not work that will be realized in our generation, and I don't mean slow down, and I don't mean work harder, or to discourage the work in the dream that we will see some of this change, but to know that it's the Anishinaabe talk about that we need to look 7 generations behind in order to be able to look 7 generations ahead, and that each step that we make on our path is essentially, each action is essentially dreaming and forming the world of our great, great, great grandchildren. And so to me, it's our job is to build their world, and so I want faster, bigger, loftier, more wide open changes to be on. Right now, we're just trying to get the changes for survival. But man, once we get past that, I think that, when we get into the anything is possible and we are our greatest selves, that's what we're working towards. I think that's what I'm working towards.
When I think of that sort of, I guess it's sort of intermeshed. When I think a lot about sort of the change that is happening and what we've seen so far, I think about, stay with me here, mushrooms. And if you're familiar with mushroom anatomy, you've got the fruiting body, which is the little friend that you see in the forest. He's a mushroom, hello. And the spores. And I would relate this change that we've seen so far to spores that are there's a lot of small parts happening that we're not necessarily seeing on the surface because everyone's expecting to see a fruiting body, an actual mushroom. But what those spores are doing is creating mycelia. Mycelia is the root of the mushroom. The mycelium is the stuff that you don't necessarily see, but it is the biggest stuff. It is the network. And I think that that's what we're moving towards, but it's very slow. It's happening slowly. And like René said, it's something that we need to be pushing more. We need to be moving a little bit more faster, a slightly warmer fire under our butts, in order to create that deep and lasting change, to build that strong foundation, to have that well-rooted mycelium in order to create a fruiting body that we are all happy with, that can be loved and enjoyed and shared.
I love that. I didn't know much about mushrooms and I don't really like to eat them, but I really appreciate, that whole understanding. My final kind of question for you guys before we go is, where can our viewers find you on socials?
So I am on Twitter at Maura, my first name, and Twitter is where I mostly hang out. I also
the original Maura.
That's amazing.
yeah,
Madonna, Maura, amazing.
2006. Being old on the internet, sometimes it's not terrible. But I also post pictures of my cat on my Instagram, which is Maura Johnston. So.
My Instagram and Twitter handle is Ziemba Vision. Ziemba is the name of my music act, Ziemba. I'm gonna do a little shameless plug here because my album just came out a couple days ago, and I have a virtual record release party on Thursday night. If anybody wants to attend, just go to my social media and you'll find all the details for more great virtual programming.
Very exciting. We'll all be there.
My band is Digging Roots at all the things. Digging Roots on Twitter and Digging Roots on Instagram and Facebook and wherever else. But you can find me personally on Instagram. If you search my name, ShoShona Kish, you'll find my profile. And I do stop in there once in a while.
Again, I caught it this time. I'm on Instagram as Neologisms, Neologisms. I'm on Twitter as me, Saffron St. James. And if you like zines, I run a little teeny tiny micro press called Late Bloomer. And we can be found at latebloomer.ca or latebloomer613 on Instagram.
Beautiful. And if you guys, for some reason, want to follow me, I'm Ella, ELLHAH, on all socials. So taking this time to say thank you guys for joining us tonight. This was actually like a very fun conversation, and I'm excited to see what happens in the future for all of us in this space, in this industry, the changes. Also, thank you to everybody who has watched and all the beautiful comments that we've seen. And yeah, that's it for us. Stay tuned for more stuff from, Venus Virtual Fest. Thank you.